the relationship between issues going on in the gut and how that might affect the brain. Who knew a gut-brain connection? I started exploring that 18 years ago at a time when people really raised their eyebrows about that whole relationship. Now it's kind of, people talk about it. It's part of our, normal parlance that we talk about, the gut-brain connection, the microbiome, the chemicals that they manufacture, et cetera. But when I started doing analysis of fecal material on patients with neurological problems, holy Toledo, what in the world is that all about?
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. We are in our brand new studio with Big Tone. How we doing, Tony?
Morning, Bear. I like the new leather seats.
That's right. You know what's tricky now with the new studio, because there's not a table in front of us. I have to actually wear pants. Or I have to be cognizant of what's below my waist.
I know. I never had shoes on.
Where before I could come straight from the gym, throw like a flannel on and have flip flops on underneath. But so now I guess we're exposed. But pumped to be with you guys in the new studio and really excited for today's guest. Today we're sitting down with Dr. David Perlmutter. He's a renowned board certified neurologist, a 6-time New York Times bestselling author, and leading expert in brain health and nutrition. Dr. Perlmutter has revolutionized the way we understand the impact of diet on the brain with his books, Brain and Brainwash, and has contributed extensively to peer-reviewed scientific journals. And his most recent book also is Drop Acid. With his expertise in neurology and experience as the director of neuroscience research at Bryan Therapeutics, Dr. Perlmutter is at the forefront of research on how our diet affects neurological health. Dr. Perlmutter, welcome to the Born Primitive Podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Doc, you got quite the background and quite the resume. So I guess to start out, we're just kind of curious if you could give us a little bit more background on you and how you got into this. And then eventually we want to, of course, get into some of the books, but most recently the book Drop Acid. So if you could just give the listeners a little rundown on you first.
I think what people most are interested in is not that I did neurosurgery and then neurology, but, when did I become, I guess, eccentric, not good or bad, just when did I start to drift away from mainstream? And it was really not until I was actually practicing neurology mainstream, and about the 10th year of that in my clinical practice, I just said that I'm not treating disease, I'm only treating symptoms. I'm treating the smoke, but I'm not paying any attention to the fire. And it was very discouraging because all I was doing was writing prescriptions. And I realized that what motivated me to write prescription were advertisements. I'd read the medical journals and interesting stuff, but it was peppered with advertisements that said, look, if you see a patient with X, you write this prescription and they are on their way. And I really finally just became dissatisfied with that approach and frustrated as the day is long. And I had 2 other partners. It's what they were doing. Everyone was making a great living. We were cranking it. We had patients coming in, lined up, and it was a very lucrative practice. And it was, pretty much following the model that persists even today, as we all know, but it wasn't fulfilling for me. I wanted to get people better. I actually, strangely, wanted to treat them in such a way that they would not need to come back to see me. I know that sounds counterproductive, right? You're trying to build a practice, but that was the goal. And I won't forget, my wife and I had the babysitter come and spend the night with our kids. We took a trip to Sanibel Island. We stayed in a crappy motel on the beach. It was all that was available because we didn't make a reservation. And it was nighttime. We're walking down the beach and we both kind of looked at each other and asked the question at the same time, what's the worst that could happen? Because I was going to go on my own and I was going to pursue this kind of approach to brain disorders that dealt with understanding the underlying problem, i.e., what makes a good brain go bad, not what you do once it's bad. And we realized that, we'll make it. And so I left my practice on very good terms and opened up my clinic with 2 employees. And we started seeing patients and it started to grow and, adding employees, built a hyperbaric center, began doing intravenous therapies. And, before long, I was getting some really good results in terms of turning things around. And then at that point decided that these findings are really important. I need to start sharing them. So I started lecturing at various integrative type medicine conferences, functional medicine, et cetera, and then began writing books like Grain Brain and Brain Maker, and 16 books in total so far. And, that's how I got off and running in terms of pursuing what was important for me, at least to find a fulfilling life.
Doctor, what was the catalyst to allow you to even start to question kind of your traditional training in the practice you were involved in before you decided to kind of step outside of the box? Was it just you being self-reflective of the outcomes you were seeing in patients, or was it you exploring your own health?
I just turned 70, and we had a big party here, and one of the guests was somebody I've known since kindergarten, and he said quite correctly, he said, "You've always been a pain in the ass," and it's true. I'm the first to admit it. I never followed orders. I'm that kind of guy, and I'm sure between you guys, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, and so I never wanted to toe the line, not just to be rejecting of what was going on, but I always wanted more, and so. That made me kind of look around. I'll tell you what finally was the straw was somehow it became clear to me that women who experienced ruptures of silicone breast implants, stay with me on this, were having neurological issues that were sometimes life-threatening. And no one was making the connection, or if they weren't really talking about it. So I did a deep dive studying the effects of silicone exposure in terms of the brain, and somehow became qualified as the only expert witness from legal perspective who could testify on behalf of women who are suffering neurological issues, sometimes, really debilitating as a consequence of ruptured silicone implants. And that led, of course, to a very large class action lawsuit for which I was an expert witness. But that was really, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back in my mainstream practice, because, I was examining women's breasts as a physician might do to determine their degree of rupture, and then, of course, I'd get an MRI as well. And that was just a little much for my colleagues, my partners. So that was really, you ask, what was it that pushed me over the edge? Well, I think that pushed me over the edge, pushed them over the edge. And so that we had a very a mutually agreed upon separation. It was great, because once I opened up my own clinic, Katie barred the door. I was free to run and explore, all kinds of crazy ideas, like the relationship between issues going on in the gut and how that might affect the brain. Who knew a gut-brain connection? I started exploring that, 18 years ago, at a time when people really raised their eyebrows about that whole relationship. Now it's kind of, people talk about it. It's part of our, normal parlance that we talk about, the gut-brain connection, the microbiome, the chemicals that they manufacture, et cetera. But when I started doing analysis of fecal material on patients with neurological problems, holy Toledo, what in the world is that all about? And I was very much, the word is ridiculed by mainstream individuals. I was about to say colleagues, but they really weren't my colleagues. But I did find a home in groups of doctors who were doing functional medicine, alternative medicine. When I would go there and say, as a matter of fact, we did fecal analysis on a series of patients with multiple sclerosis. Here's what we found, and here's what I believe it means, and here's how we can fix that in hopes of helping these individuals. Those were really supportive audiences that really were important for me, because it kind of gave me a pat on the back, said, yeah, it's out there. But, you may as well stick with it, because we're starting to see those kinds of results in other areas of medicine.
And I'd love to drill down a little bit there, because that's one, and you're right. Like a decade ago, gut issues was just starting to be talked about. And I know it sounds like you, even before then, were pioneering kind of some connections that people just weren't talking about, specifically in the mainstream. But even today, although it definitely is talked about in the larger zeitgeist, and it's why I want to drill down is because I literally had a friend last night text me, and I'm certainly no expert, about them just having some like base gut issues, and they said, hey, could you connect me with anyone that could help with this? And so the question for me is even now where it is, it's much more like people understand like, hey, not only like probiotics, of course, in your gut health overall is affecting the way you think and feel, but what are some practical takeaways for individuals now that you would say, having been in that field for 20 years at this point, that the everyday person could implement that would allow them to both understand the connection better, but then also be able to apply some things that would make them feel better and think better?
That is a great question, because it's what you're entreing to is not just the notion of fixing a problem, but really, how did you get into the mess in the first place? And our approach to handling the gut, as is anyone, not just for the brain, but anyone who's dealing with gut issues, and their relationship to other things in the body, or just the relationship to the gut itself, involves what we call the 3R program: remove, replace, and repair. And so, as we look at remove, right off the bat, what are the things that we are doing that are threatening the diversity and the function of our billions of gut organisms? And let's say not just bacteria, but viruses and fungi as well. And I think, getting to the name of this podcast, for crying out loud, we are now living in a world that is very much at odds with our physiology. This whole notion of paleo, of trying to replicate what our earlier environment must have been like, and how did that allow us to survive, to allow us to be alive today. What are all those changes that took place over tens, hundreds, if not thousands of years to allow us to adapt to our environments? Now we challenge every aspect of our physiology. And getting back to your question, we sure as heck challenge the gut bacteria and the other organisms collectively with their metabolites called the microbiome, by so many aspects of our modern world. So where do we begin? Well, I think the best place to begin is food. And I think, one of the simplest things to recognize is that your gut bacteria need fiber to be healthy and happy. If they're not healthy and happy, you're in deep trouble. You're in trouble from an immunological perspective and even a brain perspective. So the simple response is you've got to analyze your diet and make sure you're eating enough good fiber. And that means fruits and vegetables. I'm not saying go full on vegetarian, but that's one of my criticisms of being full on carnivore, is there's no fiber in any animal product. And I'm an omnivore. I eat my share of beef and fish and chicken, but I think most of what I think is best for us from the gut microbiome perspective has to do with what fuels them, and that is fiber. I think the second thing is, our very toxic environment threatens our gut bacteria. And when we threaten our gut bacteria, we threaten their ability to do good things. And one of the most important things that the gut bacteria do is they maintain the integrity of the gut lining. When that is threatened, we're in trouble. I'll get back to that in just a moment. Let's first talk about some of these threats. And, we can talk about toxins in the environment. Immediately you're thinking about, the 10,000 chemicals that we're exposed to that we've never been exposed to before, the PM 2.5 particles in the atmosphere that we breathe and ingest. That's certainly very relevant with respect to the recent fires out in California. But I think that more importantly, we should be thinking about everyday things that we expose ourselves to, that we're not really classifying as being toxic, but nonetheless are really having an impact on our gut microbiome, like taking over-the-counter non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, or proton pump inhibiting acid blocking drugs. We see these advertised on television. Somebody's going to go eat a great big sausage sandwich, then their stomach's upset, and they'll pop a couple of Prevacid or something. No, don't eat the sandwich if it upsets your stomach. Don't eat the sandwich and cover it up by taking Prevacid, which does what? It reduces stomach acid aggressively, and that changes the pH environment of the entire digestive system. Now, recognize that the array, the diversity and function of the gut bacteria depend on their environment, and the pH of that environment is very critical in terms of determining which bacteria will live and which bacteria will not. So you're going to already shift the environment. We know that there's a significant, like 48% increased risk in long-term users of these proton pump inhibiting drugs. and also even larger increased risk, as much as 70% increased risk of stroke. Now, Alzheimer's and stroke are fundamentally inflammatory. How might that relate to changes in the gut bacteria? Well, again, it gets back to this notion that the gut bacteria are keeping the walls of the fortress intact. They're maintaining the gut integrity, the lining integrity. When that is breached because we've messed with the gut bacteria and their array, their diversity, their function, then bad things get from the garbage dump into the system and light up the immune system and turn on inflammation. And that is a central player in virtually every neurodegenerative condition that you don't want to get. So what I've just done is related some very common practices that we are told to pursue, like taking the darn PPI drug over the counter when we don't tolerate the sausage sandwich, and getting Alzheimer's. Now, that may seem like a stretch. Those are two seemingly very disparate dots to connect, but it's real. This is, wonderful peer-reviewed medicine, and we now understand these mechanisms, and it allows people like me to come on a podcast like yours and say, hey, this isn't a free ride, taking drugs like this, drinking chlorinated water, not getting enough restorative sleep, spending too much time sitting down and not moving around, keeping, being on a diet that's letting your blood sugar rise. All of these things threaten your gut microbiome, and our brain health vitally depends on the health of the billions of organisms living within us.
When how Bear and I were talking before we hopped on, for the everyday person like Bear or I, who isn't deep in the research such as yourself and doesn't have decades worth of just both practical experience and clinical experience, we live in a day and age where it's almost crazy to watch how one day you can be exposed to a credentialed individual saying only eat meat, and then the next day somebody like yourself saying like, hey, I'm not saying don't eat meat, but fiber is important. And you hear these just conflicting narratives almost daily nowadays, which for you, I bet, makes you want to just rip your hair out. But I would love for you.
It doesn't. For two reasons. Number one, I've got very little, A, and B. And B, I learned long ago to take a deep breath. And I had a lesson, an experience, and it said, don't engage. Just take a deep breath, put a smile on your face that comes from deep within, not just moving your face muscles, but have that smile come from here. And which is a really interesting practice, actually does change level of inflammatory chemicals in your body. But having said that, I think that most of the messaging is not from people who've done the deep dive into the research. Influencers do just that. They influence, and all well and good. I think that, my mission is to interact with those credentialed individuals who are in a place where they can accept being challenged. That's really, something we're not seeing anymore in our, where we are now in 2025, is that there's no more market, no more agora. Where the agora in Greece was the place where people shared ideas and would listen to other people's ideas. That's not happening anymore. It's my way or the highway. And it's full on carnivore, it's full on vegetarian, because that's what I do. And you can always find research to support your contention. That's the way the world is. And everybody has access today to the deepest level of research bot you can imagine. And having said that, I hear what you're saying. I feel your pain. It's challenging for consumers to get the right messaging. And that's why, I stay in the batter's box and keep swinging and keep, putting out information based on as extensive a research as I'm able to do, which is far more extensive these days with AI than I ever could have imagined. And, come up with not only what's science-based and makes sense, but more importantly, what I can convey to the general public such that it's understandable.
Well, I think it's challenging too, and we don't need to drill down deep into this, but even post COVID and even like phrases like trust the science now, like the individuals are struggling with, and I'll even speak for myself. It gets confusing because, as you said, when you were kind of leaving mainstream medicine, it's like you can understand that like there are there are some big players in that game that are driving behind the outcome of a certain study, that like it isn't as, there's some disingenuous players, I guess you could say, is that it isn't as simple as like everyone's out for the best of your health at all times. So there too, like how can an individual make sure that if they are trying to follow what's most relevant within this kind of scientific zeitgeist, what are some tips from you who's deep in it to make sure your sources are good within that space?
That's a really very difficult question because, getting back to earlier in your statement, that, we are recognizing that so much of what has become a standard of care in medicine is influenced by pharmacy, and therefore interested in stockholders as opposed to shareholders. And um, interesting article was published about 6 weeks ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association. It was a study that looked at the actual peer reviewers, the people who say this is a good study and this is therefore we'll give it our imprimatur of being peer reviewed. That's sort of the gold standard of a study, a peer reviewed study appeared in whatever. And it found that in the top journals, including New England Journal of Medicine, BMJ, Lancet, and JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, the most well-respected medical journals arguably on the planet, that over $1 billion, I think the period of time was a year, had been given to the peer reviewers without accountability. The idea, well, some of it's going to go to their research, but some of it went home, some of it bought the new car or whatever it did. Over $1 billion went to the peer reviewers. So it's not just that, the advertisements appearing in my journal are, dealing with, are leveraging very biased research. It's that even the notion of peer reviewed is now very much questionable. And it's worrisome to see that appear, because that was sort of something we always could hang our hat on. And I think, to be clear, moving forward, there's more of a leveraging of a visceral sense about what is right or wrong versus what science is revealing. And to be fair, I think science is a bit tainted. There's a new book, I don't think it's out yet, but it was reviewed in the New York Times last week, called Doctored. And what Doctored is about is the incredible subterfuge that was involved in research for Alzheimer's drugs. And it's breathtaking. It really is breathtaking. And it continues to this day. And these drugs are so-called FDA approved, though 10 of the 11 reviewers rejected the approval of one of them, Leqembi. 10 of the 11 researchers on the committee said, no, this isn't what we should be doing, yet it got approved. I'll leave it to you guys to figure out why that may be. But it is very challenging. And again, I don't let it upset me. I really don't. I think we continue on our way and just do the best we can. Take a deep breath, put a smile on your face, put love in your heart, and continue to, sing whatever song brings you joy. Because that's not anything new, and I don't think it's going away. And it's just the way it is. So there you go.
Doc, I'm curious because when you were in the beginning, when you were talking about how you were just cutting scripts to people, and it was like you had a good thing going, but you kind of realized that it was just a Band-Aid. I think big pharma is obviously a much more relevant topic right now. It's at the forefront of a lot of people as far from an awareness standpoint. I mean, I don't know, 5 years ago there's probably way less people talking about it, but especially with Bobby Kennedy and what he's doing, like, is there a way, like from your optic, like as a doctor, where that incredible influence can be altered? Because when there's billions of dollars at stake, that like guys are going to find a way to win.
Yeah, no, you ask a very, very good question, and it's not a simple answer. And I think, what has worked for me is I understand pharmacology and pathophysiology at a very deep level. I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but I do. It's what I do day and night. And I don't think that your typical practitioner has the luxury of spending the time to really fully understand her or his specialty, such that when they are presented at a lecture or in reading an article or seeing even an advertisement, they have the ability to be able to scrutinize the findings of these studies and help to understand where the flaws may be, and maybe it's worthwhile. I want to be very clear, though, and that is that I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. That's for darn sure. As it relates to Alzheimer's, for example, I know where the research is going, and I'm incredibly optimistic about where we're going to go with respect to being able to treat that disease. I believe that we could prevent the disease right now today as we're having this conversation. We might talk about that. But so I'm not anti-pharmaceutical in any way, shape, or form. When my father was dying of Alzheimer's disease, had there been a meaningful treatment, I would have absolutely embraced it and prescribed it. But that was not available. And to this day, it's not available. I hope that there will come a day. And I think it's actually going to be very soon.
Dive a little deeper, because I think it'll open up some avenues. When you say you think right now Alzheimer's could be prevented, unpack that for us.
Sure. I somehow knew that's where you would go. Not that I teed that one up, did I?
You did. Alley-oop.
I think that, the notion that Alzheimer's is caused by the accumulation of beta amyloid in the brain is silly. It really is silly. We know that the research was doctored, photoshopped, the images, flawed. We know that plenty of people have Alzheimer's who don't have any beta amyloid in their brains at all. We know that plenty of people have tons of beta amyloid in their brains and are cognitively quite intact. So it is neither necessary nor sufficient to cause the disease. Is there
Doc, real quick, sorry to interrupt. Why was there some type of incentive to alter that data? That seems a pretty what was that? Clearly
so the data was published in Nature. What was doctored was actually a measurement of changes in a level of a certain type of beta amyloid in an array kind of a way that it was looked at actually in laboratory animals, and it was doctored to show a different result. And it turns out that this was one of the fundamental research studies in amyloid, and it's been the subject of a lot of press review and was actually mentioned in that book that I just mentioned called Doctored. But having said that, the idea that there is a cause of all cases of Alzheimer's disease, the accumulation of this so-called sticky protein, beta amyloid in the brain, end of story, what did that allow? Okay, if that is the cause, then we'll spend billions of dollars to get rid of that beta amyloid, and voila, we fixed the problem, right? It's perfect. And so that's how it all went down. We now see a proliferation of drugs to either reduce the formation of beta amyloid in the brain or get rid of beta amyloid in the brain, and that should fix the problem. And the approval that I alluded to, I discussed earlier from the FDA said, we understand that using this drug in your trials isn't really making people any better, but it's getting rid of the beta amyloid, and we're going to use that as a surrogate for Alzheimer's disease. May I say that's pathetic? Because it is pathetic. The drug doesn't work to help people get better, but yet it rids the brain of this beta amyloid. So you're blaming Alzheimer's on this protein, and that's not the cause. It's like saying, oh, every time we see a fire in the neighborhood, firemen are there, so they're obviously involved somehow. Let's get rid of the firemen, problem solved. Doesn't work that way. Is beta amyloid playing a role in some people? Of course it is. But what is now, I think, the real center of discussion as it relates to Alzheimer's is it is a metabolic problem. It's a problem with how the cells in the brain, specifically the immune cells, are using energy, and it relates to what's called their mitochondria. It explains why, then, there's about a fourfold increased risk, in patients who have type 2 diabetes. It explains why there's an increased risk in hypertensive individuals and individuals who in midlife are obese. So it explains why there is an increased risk, dramatic increased risk post-COVID, or the relationship between herpes simplex virus or chlamydia pneumonia, or a mouth bacterium called Porphyromonas gingivalis. So lots of inroads can change the immune function in the brain and manifest then as Alzheimer's, and can lead to then the accumulation of this beta amyloid. But these things are way, way upstream of the beta amyloid. So targeting the beta amyloid is when the Mississippi's dumping into the Gulf of Mexico. And we got to pay attention to what's going on way up higher in Ohio, that's putting the pollution in the first place. And the really empowering news is that our lifestyle changes have a huge role to play in what's going on initially in the brain and setting the stage 20 and 30 years ahead of time before you start forgetting grandchildren's names in the Wi-Fi code.
Yeah, and what are there's a quote I pulled, and I once again I told Bear before we hopped on, I feel like this sums up a lot of, and you just got into kind of your ability to unpack a complex thing like that and trace it back to something like just overall metabolic health. And of course, I'm oversimplifying the nuance to which you approach the subject, but I pulled a quote when I was prepping from you that I heard you say, and I thought it was really relevant. And I think it'll allow us to expand on kind of the metabolic health as a whole, that conversation even better. Is you said, looking at all the metabolic nuances of being a human being through the lens of the environmental advantage they offered, and now how disadvantages they are, or how disadvantageous they are in light of how current environment has changed. So I'd love for you to unpack that, because I think that's such a great way for you to sum up that, like, hey, these things that we're wrestling with now are actually at one point were a benefit to us, but now, given that our environment now compared to say 50,000 years ago is completely different, they've now, something that was an adaptation to actually benefit us as humans has now become a maladaptation just based off environment.
Yeah, I mean, and I've characterized what you just said as being what we call an evolutionary environmental mismatch. So, we're living with a genome that, our DNA that codes for every bit of our processes, moment to moment, our physiology and our ability to deal with challenges that evolved in a time where we didn't have what we were being exposed to today. This has kind of been something I've been thinking about for a while. I wrote my first article on this when I was 15. I published it in the Miami News, I think it was, where I had just come back from the Sebring car races, which was a challenging event for my physiology, I can tell you, because you're up, for 36 hours watching the car. Anyway, but that said, I was wondering, as I was watching what I thought would be the future of humanity, how we can adapt to the sounds and the toxicity of our environment. And, made the observation that I put in that article. We don't, the change of our genome over time, evolution of our genome, is an extremely slow process. So we don't have the luxury of waiting for ourselves to adapt to the chemicals in our environment, the light pollution, the lack of sleep, the constant noise, the PM 2.5 particles that we're breathing, and just the stress of day-to-day life. We're not going to be able to adapt if we're going to depend upon a genetic adaptation, because that's not going to happen. That said, what I didn't know then, and I certainly didn't know even until quite recently, because it's new science, is that while we can't change the 88 keys of our piano, we can play a different song of our genome piano. We can make it sound like a different song. And that means that we can't change our genetic code, but we can influence how it is expressed. You guys in your generation, I know, I've heard of epigenetics and methylation and how these markers on my genome can change and change expression. Great. I got to tell you, man, when I was even in medical school, if I would have talked about that, I would have been, who knows what, kicked out, and would have been heresy. Like the idea that we can grow new brain cells. Not when, and I was in medical school in 1981 is when I started. And, you think these ideas that we grow new brain cells, that's always been the case. In my lifetime, again, this was revolutionary. So what I'm saying is we are empowered now to recognize, no, can't change our genome. That's an evolutionary change, but we can change how it's expressed. And that empowers us to recognize that these little tags on our DNA that influence which genes turned off and which genes turned on moment to moment, about 80% of those that are involved in health and longevity are under our direct control based upon our lifestyle choices. that is, that's worth sitting down for. That's a pretty empowering and giving a sense of responsibility as well. I mean, so basically, I just hit the ball across the net back to your side of the court because now it's in your court to deal with your future, your brain's destiny, your health destiny, your longevity, your health span are really based upon what you decide to do today, not what you come to me as a doctor and say, doc, um, the old brain, isn't working as we used to, my heart's not so great. I'm overweight. I'm diabetic. What should I do? No, it really empowers you uh, with this responsibility to learn as much as you can and make these important lifestyle changes right now because they're going to be hugely influential as you age.
Yeah, I love that. I love the shift, and I feel like that is a generational shift happening of like the owning of the responsibility, as you said, to hey, these things aren't something you just go to a doctor and they give you a pill to fix.
But that's the model. That's the model that's been is so pervasive, and that is why there is such an incredible crisis of health in America. Is because that model has been supported by pharmaceutical interventions. The idea of fix it with a pharmaceutical. It makes its way into medical education. It certainly makes its way onto your television. The advertiser that really gets me is I've gotten my A1C below 7. You know what I'm talking about? The
Oh, yeah, there's
diabetes
a little
drugs.
jingle
Oh, my
to it,
A1C is
too.
below
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
I'm now able to whatever. Well, no, you can't. You're not gonna. Your metabolic health is going to allow you to whatever it is, or skydiving or whatever. Um, let me digress for just a moment. Having your A1C below 7 is ridiculous. Health issues related to your heart, related to your brain, begin at around 5.5, as a matter of fact, on your A1C. So the metric of below 7 is something that's pretty achievable with these various diabetes drugs when you stay on them for the rest of your life, as we would want, because we keep our customers coming back for more. But and achieving under 7 is pretty darn easy when you take a drug, that's for sure. But it's a ridiculous goal, and yet that's what's being messaged.
But do you feel, and here, this might be my own confirmation bias just based off the people I hang around and surround myself with, but to me, I see like two groups forming is like those that are kind of still operating under that, what I would call at this point, a slightly outdated model of like, doctor, fix me. I'm overweight. Let's do Ozempic. And I don't even know the specifics of if there's a practical use for that or not. I'm just using it to be a bit dramatic. But on the optimism side, or where I say it might be my own confirmation bias, I see individuals who are taking extreme ownership of their health. And of course, you've written books that I remember back in 2015 when I first got exposed to Grain Brain, but I see individuals really taking ownership and becoming, and once again, saying this to be dramatic, but kind of their own doctors that like through their activity levels, through the foods they're eating, through their ability to even have a base understanding of their blood results and be able to unpack that in a way that they can have practical takeaways and applications for their own health. So do you remain optimistic, or would you say that like, no, I'm still pessimistic about the way we're trending culturally, because yet it feels to me two distinct groups are forming of those relying on traditional mainstream medicine. And to me, the outcomes of that aren't going to be good or are rearing its head already. But then there is a group that I stay optimistic about, where people are more interested in taking ownership over the base understanding of their health and how to influence that in a positive way.
No, I think the dichotomy that you describe is very, very real. And I think it's kind of old school versus new school. I mean, again, the old school model is doctors have this incredible fund of knowledge, and they're going to figure it out for you, and versus taking agency. And I think that the idea of taking agency is becoming much more popular, which is something I'm very grateful for. And the empowerment of individuals with knowledge, very deep knowledge these days, is something that's we see it happening and expanding, almost month to month. I mean, the idea that you can now buy a continuous glucose monitor and get an incredibly impactful metric with respect to your metabolism, your blood sugar, which is, I think, at the root of most chronic degenerative illnesses these days, is breathtaking. I mean, there was a time just a few years ago where there was a huge debate. In fact, there was an editorial debate going on in the Journal of the American Medical Association saying that people should not have the ability to wear a continuous glucose monitor without a prescription, without being under the guidance of a doctor, because the implication then is because a doctor is going to know what's best in terms of medication for your elevated blood sugar. Well, we don't want to get to the point of needing a medication for elevated blood sugar. And it turns out that a CGM is a great tool to keep yourself away from becoming diabetic and needing the drug. And to be fair about it, the doctor's not going to be able to really intervene with you early on when your blood sugar starts to creep up, because that's going to require lifestyle modification like diet. And to be fair, most doctors didn't get much education in terms of nutrition in medical school, so it's not going to help. So, as you well know, you can get a CGM now without a prescription, which I think is fantastic. The argument that I always put forth was, look, if you don't want people to know their blood sugar for whatever reason, why do we allow people to buy a bathroom scale? I mean, if they shouldn't know their body weight by that logic, because if they know their body weight, they might make some lifestyle changes and lose weight. Same thing with a CGM. If you know your blood sugar, hey, you know what? You might stop drinking the Diet Coke. That's something we'll talk about, or eating, the ultra processed foods that are raising your blood sugar. So I think it's all about knowledge and empowerment. And I look at the idea that people can go to Function Health and have a huge array of blood work done, that you can get blood studies that are really sophisticated related to brain health without a doctor. I think this information, you can metricize your sleep and wear an Oura ring. I think this is just a wonderful age. But you're right. It's driving a wedge, I think, in the population between those who say, my doctor says whatever, Mylanta. There's a commercial. My doctor says Mylanta. No, I would say stop eating whatever that crap is that's giving you upset stomach. Anyway, but that said, I like podcasts like this because I can get a wee bit cynical and get away.
Oh yeah, we love it.
It's okay. But I think that the point, Tony, that you make is that there is a bit of a polarization going on between those who simply want to offload agency and those who want to own their destiny and make those changes. But the great thing about the changes is they're informed by biometrics, and those biometrics are now available to everybody.
I think I'm a bit more pessimistic than you, Tony. There are definitely people that do that, but you're looking at the 0.1%, right?
I agree with that.
The masses, they're still going to gravitate towards go to the doctor. Oh, give me this med, this med, this med. I'm overweight, but I don't care. Just lower my blood pressure. And until you fix the overarching system, there's going to be people like you and me that are going to go out of our way to read nerdy articles and do podcasts and listen to stuff. And oh wow, yeah. But think about it, man. I mean, it's the amount of people that regularly go to the gym. Right. It's when you look at the actual percentage of humans that do that, it's these gyms, One Life, they probably have 10,000 members. If you go at 8:30 in the morning, there's 80 people there, right? They got 5,000 members, but 80% of them will never go. So I'm not as optimistic, but it's a start.
I didn't necessarily characterize that as being optimistic.
No, I know. I'm just, Tony, you were kind of saying, oh, there's this split. And I'm well, there's a small sliver of people that are starting to figure it out. But if you look at the health of America, go walk into a Walmart, dude. Seriously, I'm not even joking. Walk into a Walmart and then tell me, oh, everyone's taking agency of their own life. It's no, not even close.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So maybe I'm a bit cynical too, but
I think there's as he said, there's a generational kind of shift there too, that I think it can I think it can happen quick. Now, of course, can I hold both the pessimistic and the optimistic view at the same time? But here's where, once again, this might be delusional, but if we educate in the proper way, now, is that happening? Probably not. But I think if you educate the youth in a proper way, it isn't rocket science. That doesn't mean if you want to go, you can go deeper and deeper to this, where there's nuances that take somebody like Dr. To decades worth to really unpack in the proper way. But I think the optimism remains is that hey, if we as a society get to a point where we finally agree that like, hey, maybe this should be something we're educating our youth on as they're teenagers.
It should be, but is Big Pharma going to allow that? Seriously.
Well, I know.
Do they have so much influence that it'll never make it into an elementary school, middle school, high school? The doctors that are going through school are never going to learn about it. I mean, Doc just, it confirmed that.
Yeah.
So rather than you come into your appointment and you got high blood pressure, is that doctor going to be an expert in telling you your lifestyle changes first? You know what I mean? And hey, come back in 8 weeks. Maybe some. Yeah. Right. Or are they going to say, hey, here's this prescription, but hey, try to lower your sodium and like, hey, come back in 8 weeks. You know what I mean? So will the system ever change? To me, it's follow the money. When there's billions of dollars at stake, and you're a C-suite executive, and you could get a $40 million bonus every year because of good performance, people's moral compass will become very swayed very easily to meet the shareholders, make sure they're whole, right? And so that, to me, that's obviously I'm a capitalist, but there are some drawbacks to what capitalism can produce, and I think Big Pharma is one of them. And I think that's why you look at the advertisements, and of course these are just my opinions, but don't they say with these news companies, like the Big Pharma is like 70% of their advertising clients?
What's the other percentage though? That's where I'd like to take our conversation, because the pharmaceutical issue is the response. Yeah. Right? It's a response to the problem. Where did the problem come from? The problem came from what the other ads are about, and it's all about eating crap.
Yeah.
So that's
the big food.
Begins.
That's
Eat
the big
crap,
food combo.
Take the drug. That's how it works. So, the notion of getting involved upstream by the ultra processed food and the amount of sugar in what passes for food that's where we really need to begin. And I in 2021, every 5 years, the USDA issues their guidelines for nutrition for America, and it is very much used by the federal government in terms of outreach programs and military, et cetera, in terms of what types of foods are either given to military provided, or what types of foods are supported in various programs like SNAP. And it comes out every 5 years. When Biden took office, the recommendation from the United States Department of Agriculture said that 10% of your calories can come from sugar. That's cool. Go ahead, have 10%. We've done all the research, and that's going to be okay. And can you imagine 10% of your calories if you're on that's 260 calories for a 2,600 a day calorie diet, 260 calories coming from sugar. So I wrote an op-ed in MedPage Today along with a Dr. Casey Means, wrote a book called Good Energy, where we challenged that. And we said, again, like you just said, follow the money. And, that we are being so heavily influenced to eat this ultra processed food. And to me, that's, the idea of ultra processed being food is an oxymoron. I mean, it's not food. Whatever it is, I don't know, but there's no historical ancestral food, getting back to our mismatch between environment and genes, that looks anything like the crap that are people are putting into their bodies. And then, okay, now you're overweight, now you're diabetic, now you're hypertensive. We've got the fix for that problem. Need I say? I hate when people say it goes without saying, because then you say it, right? So if it goes without saying, why
it's kind of like with all due respect, and then you say something really mean.
But look at the incredible success of the GLP-1 agonists, Ozempic-like drugs globally. It's the quick fix. Oh, wow, I'm just going to stick this needle in my belly and problem solved. No, you're treating the smoke. You're not treating the fire. Problem not solved. And, but yet it works. We'll feed people crap. They'll become diabetic. They'll gain weight, and we'll fix that too. It works. Does that ever generate money? Boy, it sure does.
Doctor, I would love, kind of on the level of like the ultra processed food, I think what would be really helpful for let's say somebody's ready to take back their agency, or they've already taken their agency, but they're confused because, as we said, there's so much information out there. I think something that you would do a great job of is let's lay out like level 1, level 2, level 3. Let's do 4 levels, meaning like level 1, cut out ultra processed food. And then as we go up in the levels, of course, you're adding more nuance to like, hey, if you've completed that and you did that for 6 months, then try this. And of course, I know that could be a whole podcast within and of itself, but if you had to make kind of just gross generalizations of like, hey, these 4 things, start with these, say you're at ground zero, you've been eating a really bad ultra processed diet, let's say 70% of your food is ultra processed diet, but you're ready to make change. What would those 4 levels for you be? And let's put like 6 months on each of them. Like, hey, you complete this for 6 months, move on to this, and this at 4 different levels.
Well, let me take a step back and unpack one nuance for you, because I think having this as a foundation will pave the way for a better understanding what I'm about to say. And that is that our decision making is fundamental here. Am I going to exercise? Am I going to get better sleep? Am I going to avoid ultra processed foods? How does one decide yay or nay? We have 2 important decision making areas of the brain: the more reptilian part, called the amygdala, and the more sophisticated adult in the room, which is called the prefrontal cortex. And as we reach our early teens, there's a connection between the adult in the room and the amygdala reptilian brain. So we get away from, I want this, darn it, I'm going to do it now, I'm going to stay up late, I'm going to eat crap, and I just want it because that's all I want to do, end of story, versus I'm going to do what's good for me and actually what's good for others. This brings empathy into the equation as well, which is a prefrontal cortex kind of attribute. These are connected. These 2 areas are connected. The prefrontal cortex, the adult in the room, influences the amygdala, influences the child in the room, hopefully for better outcome. That's where we make our decisions. What's important here is that connection, allowing the adult in the room to make better decisions, is threatened by inflammation. Now, stay with me on this. So the more inflamed we are, the more likely we are to eat crap, not exercise, be sedentary, and do all the wrong things, and really live a life that's only concerned with ourselves and not others. Okay? So what I'm just connected to is this notion that the more inflammation in our bodies, the more primitive is our decision making and the less thoughtful we are about doing the things that you want me to talk about. The more inflammation in our bodies, we can get to that place by eating crappy foods. So as we eat these ultra processed foods, it threatens our ability to make better decisions. Caramba, that is worrisome. The more of this bad food that we eat, then the more likely we are to keep eating that bad food, to become less active, to stay up late, to have, bad sleep hygiene habits, and to be, really not an empathetic individual because of inflammation. So basically what we've seen happen, what I've observed, is that as this trend globally to eating crappy foods, we used to call it the standard American diet, SAD, then we called it the Western diet. Now it's the global diet of eating all this ultra processed crap, which raises blood sugar and increases inflammation, but it's threatening our decision making. So we can't make the things happen as easily as you want me to make them happen for you by giving you the list. However, here's the really cool part of this discussion. We can get on the superhighway of better health and better decision making by multiple on-ramps. What I mean by that is any small thing that we can do to start us on the road to reducing inflammation improves our decision making, and then will facilitate our ability to layer on other activities. Let me give you an example. If you tell a patient, don't make any changes in your diet yet, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start an exercise program. And, patient, I don't do any exercise. I will say, I want you to walk 1 block. Can you give me 1 block? Anybody, hopefully can walk, unless they're disabled, can say, yeah, I can give you, I'll walk 1 block. Fine. Because next week I'm going to say 2 blocks. Next week you're going to buy a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, and we're really going to start looking at pulse rate and all that stuff. But even the simple fact of changing your level of exercise does what? Reduces inflammation in your body and amplifies your ability to bring the adult in the room and make better decisions, paving the way then for the dietary changes and the sleep hygiene and all the other things that allow you to really regain your metabolic health. I'll tell you a quick story. I once said to a patient, I want you to walk, I think we can get you to feel better. I want you to walk a mile a day, and then in a week, give me a call and let me know let me know. And a week later, I get a call and I said, how are you feeling? He said, well, I feel fine, but I'm 7 miles away from home. That's a joke. I had to do it. That's a dad joke. If my daughter were here right now, she'd pop me on the head. Anyway, but getting back to our story, so it really doesn't matter. What is our entree? Now, here's a person who is just, dead set against exercise. Okay. In that individual, we say, okay, here's what I need you to do. Let's buy an Aura ring and really figure out what in the heck's going on with you. When you say you're sleeping well all night long, look what we found. Let's look at your phone. And now you realize, you're only sleeping 6 hours because you might have sleep apnea or you might have periodic leg movements or who knows what. And you're not getting enough deep restorative sleep. So you're not cleaning out the debris from your brain, and that's increasing inflammation. Let's work on your sleep hygiene over the next month and see if we can improve that. What will that do? It'll decrease inflammation. And then again, allow us next in this person to layer on the dietary changes and the exercise changes and all the things that we know will ultimately help that individual regain his or her metabolic health. So it's hard to triage when you ask what's first, what's on that list first for everyone. Really, this is the beauty of what we call personalized medicine. I need to find out, Bear, where you're slipping and where you need help, and target that first. And that's why it's so important not to know the disease that a person has, but who is the person who has the disease.
On the note of processed foods, Doc, because obviously there's a lot that it's like, low calorie or no sugar, but of course it's replaced with artificial sweeteners. And I'm pretty healthy for, I'd say 85% of the time, but I do enjoy a Diet Dr. Pepper pretty frequently. For just anyone listening, what is the body's response when you consume like a 0 or a 10 calorie beverage or anything like that you're like, oh, there's no calories, I'm good? Like, isn't there still...
Again, this is perverse mismessaging, and you fell into it.
Yeah. And I kind of know, because I'm like, all right, I know there's 10 calories, but like, it's too good to be true.
I love calories. I think the higher calorie, the better. The question is, where are they coming from?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the most calorie dense food? Fat. That's why we use a lot of fish oil and olive oil and avocados and nuts and seeds, because fat is good. Fat calories are metabolized far differently than our carbohydrate and sugar calories, that's for sure. So gravitating towards something that's 0 calorie is you've fallen prey. I'm not going to gain weight. Well, you will. Diet drinks are associated with more weight gain than sugar sweetened beverages. Diet sweetened gains are associated with a significant increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Why might that be? Probably because of the effect of the artificial sweeteners on changing your microbiome, and as such, setting the stage for metabolic mayhem. Who knew? Diet drinks lead to weight gain. Diet drinks increase your risk of type 2 diabetes. That's reality. But when you say 0 calories, then if it's a bubbly flavored water, I'm fine with that. And so I think, we have to look at these sweeteners and with a significant degree of suspicion. If you want to sweeten something with allulose, I'm totally fine with that. Allulose is a type of sugar that has 0 actual sugar calories in it in terms of net calories, and actually lowers your response of consuming carbohydrates. In other words, it blunts your rise in blood sugar when you are actually consuming carbs. It's a pretty exciting new development in the world of sweeteners. Actually increases what's called GLP-1, like Ozempic. So that's what allulose does. I'd steer clear of aspartame, sucralose, and certainly we don't see much saccharin anymore. And I would also steer clear of xylitol and the sugar alcohols, especially erythritol, in that we've seen certainly increased risk of cardiovascular events from consumption of that particular sugar alcohol. So
what about like stevia and like monk fruit? Because there's ones that's like, oh, it's all natural. Is that BS as well?
I see a lot of stevia and monk fruit being used, and I don't see a lot of negative data related to them.
Okay.
So I don't have a huge problem with them. But I think allulose is really going to be the cat's meow moving forward, because it's not just
Wow.
that it's neutral, but it's actually positive in terms of doing good things for you.
Well, Doc, I thought we'd get into it. Maybe we can save it for a different one, but I think you'll laugh. When I was prepping, the first thing I did after like 10 minutes of listening to you was I went on my last blood draw and looked at my uric acid level. So I know we're time constrained, so that can be one we save if we hop back on. But I do have to tell you, I was at 2.6, which I was super excited about
Wowzers.
yeah, it's funny because we had Dr. Andy Gallopin on, which he's more in the
I'm checking my
performance.
level, by the way.
He's more
No,
in
my
the
last one is can you read that? 4.7.
4.7. Well, what's funny is so and I forget that Vitality Blueprint, they actually give you like recommendations based off like, hey, if you want to supplement, if you want to just use food, here's what we recommend. And I was laughing because like when I initially saw the results, I would have never, without listening to you, I would have never even thought of it. But it was like, you actually need more purine foods because your uric acid is too low. So my only last question for you is, would you agree with that? Or is it like, is there a too low for that? And this is a loaded question.
And I think it gets to the notion of personalized medicine. The question, is it too low for you?
Yeah.
And that would be, there are some genetic, what we call polymorphisms, or variations of gene expression that code for better uric acid metabolism or breakdown. And likely you're one of those individuals. But, I think it would be reasonable to look at your diet to determine what is your purine consumption as it relates, for example, to purine-rich foods, being various meats, organ meats, small fish, certainly seafoods like shrimp and scallops, et cetera. So, but I would repeat it. That's a level that's certainly lower than I've seen in a long time. So I think I would just repeat that.
Yeah, I should go back because I have like 5 of them. So that was just the
Oh,
most
really?
recent one.
No,
But
there you
I
go.
should go check. Well, no, I'm saying I didn't. I only referenced before coming on the most recent one. So yeah, I'll have to poke back through and see if the other 4.2 were that low.
Yeah, well, let me say, I know we're winding down. You guys give a real good interview, and it's so nice that there's deep, thought-provoking questions and research and all kinds of stuff. So it's really been a lot of fun. You guys are great.
Well, thanks, Doc. And I had one more question that I think some
Good.
of our listeners, just hitting the brain part real quick. So, Doc, just quick background on me. I was a college football player. I was a middle linebacker, so a lot of head trauma playing, obviously football my whole life, and then at a Division I level. And then I went into the special operations community and did that for just under 8 years. I was in the SEAL team. So a lot of shooting heavy weapons, shooting rocket launchers, explosions and stuff that rattled the brain. And obviously football players, as well as anyone that plays contact sports and, combat sports as well, of course, MMA and stuff like that, as well as, a lot of people that served in the military, are subject to just a lot of exposure for just brain stuff. And fortunately, it looks like the community is becoming more aware of some of the obviously side effects and what it can lead to later on in life. Of course, the NFL is spearheading a lot of that research, which is great because they have, hundreds of millions of dollars to put towards it. But I've noticed, I'm not in the military anymore, that I don't feel as sharp, you know what I mean? And I feel like I live a pretty healthy lifestyle. This morning I did a infrared sauna for 30 minutes and went right into the cold tub. I did my meditation. I hydrated. Tony's got the hydrogen water set up at Born Primitive now, so I'm doing the hydrogen water with the salt. I do try to practice agency and improve my overall well-being in many ways. But I was having a hard time with a lot of memory stuff, and I actually got a neuro done at a brain clinic. And the woman that actually scored me said, actually, you're like in the 99th percentile. You were able to remember all these things because in the moment you were focused. She's like, the problem you're having with your memory is because there's so much going on in your life that you're not storing things away into long-term memory, because in the moment it happens and then a million other things happen, and your brain just doesn't have the time to kind of circle back and stash it away as far as a memory. Because I mean, there's people that I've known for a couple years, and I'll run into them in town and I'll say, I have no idea who that guy's name is. And these are guys that I worked with, you know what I mean? And I'm like, how could I possibly forget that name? And that's just one of the symptoms. But I know a lot of guys are looking for ways to kind of repair their brain. And you had mentioned very early, I think I heard hyperbaric chamber and things like that. So aside from eating healthy, sleep hygiene, all these other things we talked about, are there other actual like interventions guys can be doing to help with that? And of course, this doesn't just apply to operators and football players and things like that, like hyperbaric chambers, or I see a lot of the nootropic, I think that's what it's called, medicines, where you can take these pills and it's supposed to increase clarity. So assuming someone is doing everything else right, what are some other things that, isn't snake oil that people can do to just, I guess, regenerate some of that brain and get that fog to go away? And in some cases, guys have like real scarring on the brain, and it's it ends, that can lead to depression and all these other things that TBI can lead to. So I know kind of a loaded question, but I was just curious your take on the whole brain angle.
Let's do a whole hour on this, another podcast. But let me touch upon a couple of ideas. And first, let me lay a little bit of groundwork for you, and that is that what are called the microglial cells in the brain, they make up about 10% of the cells in your brain. All the action's always been on the neuron, right? The neuron uses all this energy, and the neuron does this and that. Well, above the neuron, the guardian of the neuron is called the microglial cells. It's part of the brain's immune system. And when the microglial cell is stimulated by a virus, by SARS-CoV-2, by herpes simplex, by toxins, by trauma, by inflammation, by modified proteins from blood sugar being elevated, any number of sources, they get activated into a state that continues to increase inflammation in the brain moving forward. The reason I mention this is because that process continues to damage the brain long after the exposure to the loud noise, the head trauma, and all the things that have brought about the initial event. It explains why football players with CTE continue to worsen after they retire, right? We're all familiar with that. And that why Muhammad Ali's Parkinson's, which was brought on by repeated head trauma, continued to worsen until it ultimately killed him. So what's going on is once these brain's immune cells, called the microglial cells, shift from being the supportive, what we call M2 microglia, to becoming the evil twin, the M1 microglia, they're doing bad things downstream from themselves to threaten the surrounding neurons, but also this spreads to other microglia cells and shifts them over to becoming bad as well. That's a process going on in your brain based upon what you've told me so far. And the reason I say that is because it goes on in everybody's brain. So the global approach that we need is to shift these microglial cells back from being foe to being friend, and stopping the process from being continually what we call feed forward and leading to worsening problems. Respectfully, your issues with not remembering people's names that you worked with from a couple of years ago is not likely a consequence of having your plate be too loaded. I think that it's an indication that there may be some processing issues, which can be revealed on other types of neurocognitive testing, and certainly if you were to undergo a what's called a SPECT scan. Now, a friend of mine, Dr. Dan Amen, has clinics all around the country. I'm not sure where you guys are located, but Dan Amen, the Amen, A-M-E-N clinics, great resource for that. There is a lot of new work being done and books being written, actually, to give you all of the tools that you need moving forward to really help shift the brain's immune system back to being helpful, not hurtful. I'm doing a podcast today with a Dr. Dale Bredesen, and this is his new book. This is called The Ageless Brain. I don't know if that's backwards.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. Ageless Brain.
This is actually the galley. This book isn't out yet, but I've already read the book, gives you the tools to counter exactly what you fear the most that is going on in your brain. My new book is called Brain Wars, and it focuses on shifting those microglial cells back to being supportive and away from being destructive. Once they get tipped into that destructive mode, they stay in that destructive mode until they're coaxed back to being what's called the M2 phenotype. This is why, for example, we see long COVID. You're not infected with COVID virus anymore, but yet you're still in the dumps. and you're still having brain fog. You still can't remember people's names and all the cognitive issues that persist because it becomes a feed-forward cycle. These brain cells that are being influenced by the brain's immune cells are not functioning well. And, we all think back. I remember before we had MMA, we had what we called full contact karate. And I remember looking up from the mat with the ref, and I said to him, I have diplopia. And he didn't know what that means, double vision. I don't know why I did that. But I was 18, but I knew the term. I guess it was 22. And I said, I've got diplopia. And he was just giving me the count one. He didn't care about diplopia. Anyway, we've all done things that were not necessarily, the word is salubrious, or good for our health, good for our brains. And it's really up to us to make changes to stop that feed-forward process and then let the brain heal, because it can. We can regain cognitive function. We can reestablish new connections. And, as we mentioned earlier in our time together, grow new brain cells. Who knew? And so, Bear, I would say be encouraged. And, we can talk past the podcast personally, and I have a lot of things you can be doing.
Awesome. Well, this was fascinating. I know there's so many other directions we can go, but we really appreciate your time, Doctor. And
my pleasure. Absolutely.
I think that the takeaway here, there's so much knowledge out there. We talk about agency and taking that initiative to be one of the 0.5% that actually do it. And hopefully the systems in play can be modified slightly so the common man can still not be I guess a victim of the system in a way, and or take this medicine, do this, do that. But ultimately that comes down to the individual, and I don't want to push a victim narrative. But this is really really helpful, Doc. And anything you'd want to plug for the audience? I know there's a couple books in the mix. You said you've written 16, which is incredible. Brain Wars you just mentioned. I know you have another one coming out, I think, in the spring. I don't know if you want to mention it, but Floor
that's
Wars,
Brain
Doc.
Wars. No, it's
that's Brain Wars.
Next spring. Yeah. I wish it weren't so long, because I'm just about done writing it. And what's so challenging is, it takes so long for the publishers to get the book out, and the science will have evolved so much. But anyway, that's we'll deal with that. That's why, you put things out online. But here's the plug. And that is, the idea, I think, that we raised today, that we each have to be the arbiters of our brain's destiny. And, we live in a world that sort of wants us to believe we can do whatever we want, live our lives how we choose. And then suddenly when we're, cognitively challenged, noticing things are going wrong, then, we're told, well, there'll be something great that we'll give you and fix that problem, just like we'd fix your diabetes. And reality is we're not there. And, the issues related to brain functional decline begin, 20 to 30 years before you begin to notice. And those are the metabolic changes in the brain that reflect the metabolic changes in your body that happen to people in their 20s and 30s. So, John Kennedy said in a State of the Union address, I think in 1962, that the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. And that's my plea. So do I want to pitch anything? Yeah, that's what I'm going to pitch. The idea of each and every one of your viewers really get your arms around the idea that, modern medicine's not there to help you stay healthy as it relates to your brain. You've got to make some changes now, and plenty of great information out there to help you make that happen.
Love it.
Awesome. Good way to end it. Tony, you good?
Love it. Let's close on that.
All right, Doc. Well, you have a great day. It was very, very nice meeting you, and we appreciate all the insights.
You bet. And thank you for having me. I had a great time.
All right.
Thanks, Doc.